Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel Squire Shelf. Today I'm going to be doing a book review of a book I read recently, which is Margery Allingham's The Crime at Black Dudley. But first I just wanted to say it's become kind of a running theme, which I never thought it would be, to begin with, to talk about my hair. But I actually managed to, you can see on Saturday, to get my hair actually dyed for the first time since before lockdown. So you've never actually seen a video, not that any of you really particularly care. I've seen a video with me without roots, but yeah, I got it done on Saturday and I just feel so much better. Yeah, so I did that. So yeah, a quick update on my hair. It was all like very socially distanced and they were really great about it, but I just feel so much better for being able to finally have my hair done. So it's the little things in life. So back to Margery Allingham. So this is a crime fiction novel written in the 20s. I'd heard of Margery Allingham. She's quite a well-known figure in kind of golden era crime fiction novels. I'd heard that she was very prolific and that she has a reoccurring detective called Albert Campion, but I'd never read any of her novels, and I thought it was about time that I did. Considering I'm such a kind of fan of female crime fiction of the 20s, 30s and 40s, I thought I should definitely give one a go, and where better to start than, so this is the first in her series that features the detective Albert Campion, and it's, like I said, only the second thriller novel that she ever wrote. I didn't realise how young Margery Allingham was. So she wrote, her first piece was published, I believe, when she was 8 years old in her aunt's magazine, and then her first novel came out when she was 19, which is really kind of incredible to me because I have such reverence for authors and writers, and so the idea of being able to publish that young is just kind of, considering I like turn 30 soon, and I'm kind of reevaluating stuff and thinking 19 to like have published your first novel is really incredible. And apparently Albert Campion, so I've made some notes because I just knew there were things that I was going to forget that I wanted to mention. So yeah, he apparently features in 17 of her crime novels and also in other short stories. So like a character that she stuck with and obviously became very well known for, who I knew like literally nothing about before reading this book. So what I really liked about this novel, so first of all, actually, let me just say, it's called The Crime at Black Dudley. Now, I know this, like, Black Dudley, I suppose, is meant to have connotations of, like, Dudley, Robert Dudley, that idea of kind of a lineage, like, looking back to a really old country house, potentially, because it is Black Dudley is a place. It's the idea of this really kind of old country house. You imagine it in darkness and really quite foreboding. But as I grew up in Wolverhampton in the Black Country, and one of the areas of the Black Country is called Dudley, so it doesn't make me think of, like, I know it's kind of meant to evoke this kind of huge, sprawling, ancient, sinister country house, but it just makes me think of where I grew up, so I thought that was quite funny. And you can see here as well the dagger, the Black Dudley dagger featured on the front cover, which is kind of the major plot point. This is the murder weapon here. So to start off with, I thought I would just kind of give you a kind of brief idea of some of the characters and the setting, and then I will just kind of do my overall thoughts of the book. So what I really like is, I really love the language in this. One of the things that I do really like about crime novels written in this era is some of the words, like saying that we're all in the soup, describing somebody's like old bean. Yeah, and there's lots of other phrases. Albert Campion, so like I said, the detective, comes out with just so many absolutely hilarious lines. And at one point he makes a joke because the two main characters, who I'll get onto, so George Abershaw and Margaret Oliphant, I think is her name, yeah, also known as Meggie. They're both redheads, which I love. I love redheads. I was a redhead for a while. I love the protagonist of redheads. And at one point he makes a joke about copper. Oh, I can't remember the joke because I did actually read this book a while ago, but it's because they're both copperhead. He makes a joke about pennies and copper, and anyway, it's very funny when you actually read the novel, and not when I'm trying to remember it. And yeah, so I really like that. I love the glamour, obviously, of it being set with these kind of very glamorous, over-the-top figures in these beautiful outfits with incredible hair, kind of wandering around this house and grounds. So yeah, I really liked that. And it's really action packed. So there's a car chase in here, there's various kind of secret doors, trap doors, a big fight happens in the scullery actually at one point, with various kind of bits of kitchenalia being thrown about, which is great. So Black Dudley is described as first a monastery, of course. It's that typical kind of setting that you often expect as the kind of cliche in these sort of crime novels. It's first a monastery and then finally became a house. Black Dudley has had kind of no modernisation, of course. Why would you put in electricity and running water? So it's all kind of candles, stained glass, dark furniture, to add to that sense of not being able to kind of see who's lurking in the shadows. And I really like that. So yeah, I want to say I really like that contrast between the old and the new, which I think Allingham writes so well. So you've got this kind of the young energy of these bright young things coming in with their kind of new attitudes to sexuality, with their new phrases, and kind of really kind of shaking off the dust of the kind of Victorian Edwardian era. But then you've got this ancient house, and this kind of ancient ritual, and then you've also got the older character of Colonel Coombs, who lives at the manor, who's been living there, so that kind of juxtaposition between old and new I really like as well. And of course, not as well as this house not having electricity, it doesn't have a telephone, so when stuff goes wrong in this mystery, there's no way to contact people quickly, so no telephone, and they're also 2 miles from a public road, so that perfect setting for a murderer to be able to get away with a crime and not to be discovered or to contact the police very quickly. And in fact, the police don't come into this till really late on in the novel. They're kind of, the bright young things are very much left to kind of act on their own senses. So, as I said, so the detective in this is Albert Campion. What is really interesting to me, and I want to see actually in future novels of hers that feature him, and usually he's not the protagonist, like, at all. It's not told, the story's not told from his perspective. And when I first started reading it, I was like, well, maybe I've got that wrong. Maybe it's not Albert Campion who is the reoccurring detective in it. And he comes across as quite bumbling and a little bit sinister, because you don't know, because you realise he hasn't been actually invited. Nobody at the house party knows him. So yeah, and he's not, so you don't really kind of learn more about him and who he is till much later in the novel. So the main protagonist, who I've already mentioned, is George Abershaw, who very helpfully for the plot is a distinguished scientist, graduated from Oxford, a pathologist who has written a book and is consulted by the police because he is an expert on fatal wounds, external wounds, and so he's able to kind of tell how people have been killed, when, blah blah blah, more details. And he's actually a university friend of Wyatt Petrie, and it is Wyatt who has inherited Black Dudley. So his uncle, I said the Colonel Coombe, lives there, but it was his relation was his aunt who married the uncle, and she died. Wyatt kind of allows him to live there, but it's his house, and he invited this group of friends down. So he invites George, and also is invited to join the party is the woman that George is in love with, Margery Allingham. I mentioned Maggie. They're both redheads, which I love. I like the fact also that neither of them are described as beautiful or particularly attractive. George is kind of described as also being chubby, which I love. I just, as somebody with kind of body confidence issues who's trying to be more kind of body positive, I just love the fact that the kind of the hero of the novel, who is incredibly heroic throughout and very smart, is kind of this sort of chubby. I don't think he's particularly tall either. I might have remembered that wrong, but I don't think he's particularly tall. And Margaret is described as having a face more interesting than pretty, and the use of the word described her as plucky, which I just love the word plucky. I think it's such an old-fashioned but hilarious kind of word that we don't really use anymore, that reminds me of a chicken. So Wyatt, who I mentioned, whose house is Oxford educated, classic scholar, minor poet, and and some of the other bright young things who were there. So there's a group of 9 of them, and I really love the interactions between the 9 of them. So it's 3 women, 6 men. I won't go into all of their characters, but 2 I kind of wanted to point out. So as well as Albert Campion, the detective, and as well as George, the hero, and the heroine, his the one that he loves, Maggie. You have, I mentioned just 2 of the other characters, so Anne Edgware and Chris Kennedy, who can almost kind of be seen as stereotypes. So Chris is kind of like this, I really don't like this word, but this kind of jock. He's like, it's described as a Cambridge rugger blue, so he's very much more about physicality than anything else. But saying that, you know, he does very much have a brain. At one point, when they need to get a car running and there is no petrol, which I'll explain a little bit why in a minute, he realised that you can get a car running by alcohol, which I don't know if that's actually true. But yeah, they sacrifice some of the alcohol to try and get this car running to get away. But he is quite hot-headed, quite impetuous, and he really doesn't think very much of Albert Campion as well, and I'll just describe why in a second. But then here's the woman that he loves, and they have quite a tempestuous relationship and making each other jealous, is Anne Edgware, who is described as having outrageous conversation. I really like Anne. In the novel, she's described as stage come society, so having an actress background who's been kind of accepted into this sort of upper echelon. And you could consider her almost a bit of a stereotype. She's incredibly beautiful and glamorous, but I love the fact that she's very kind of open with her sexuality. George Abershaw, who is just kind of really scared by her, which I quite like. He just doesn't really understand her kind of femininity, but I really do, and love her. And at one point, there's a point when, so Maggie has to get Anne to come outside to talk to George to kind of explain about something that, to explain why Albert Campion is at the house party, because George has suspicions of him because she was the one that motored him down. And this is a quote from her. I just love Allingham's dialogue. So, I really couldn't bring myself to put my clothes on at this hour. Oh no, I really couldn't bring myself to put on my clothes at this hour. I usually take them off. I just love like having the confidence to be able to say that. Yeah, she's just a riot. And the last character I'll mention is Albert Campion, who is, as I said, a detective. He's described as kind of really bumbling. They think he's an idiot quite a lot of the time, and he is very funny. He's not your kind of he's not particularly quiet detective, kind of in the background. He kind of comes across like he really doesn't know what he's doing, like it's very chaotic. But he's very on the nose of people's characters. He makes lots of jokes to kind of diffuse awful situations, which are very good actually. I did kind of find myself really laughing at certain points of the novel. But once again, kind of he's not described as being particularly attractive. Spectacled, bland. Not that having spectacles on is, yeah, I don't wear my spectacles very often, but yeah, I've only had to have them recently, so I'm getting used to them. So yeah, not that I'm saying like wearing spectacles is in any way like unattractive. It's really not. But it's not that typical, ugh, I hate that word, but kind of idea of a hero. But I'm glad that those kind of stereotypes aren't in this novel. But he's described as having a mouth so unnecessary full of teeth. So I mentioned this Black Dudley dagger, this ritual that starts it off. So it's kind of this tradition in Wyatt Petrie's family that somebody was murdered in like the early 16th century by this dagger, and that they passed this dagger around, and the murderer, when he held it, got blood on his hand. And this in the 1920s has kind of evolved into a game of hide and seek, and yeah, it's this ritual that they do. Whereas like you think of in most families, like we play Monopoly, but this is obviously something that aristocratic people suggested they did in the 20s. This dagger, which is usually kind of on the wall, it's got these kind of uncut jewels. It's from Italy, I believe, has this kind of incredible history. And yes, so sometime centuries ago, it was at the scene, well, it was a murder weapon of at a murder. I didn't want you to say that when I said murder weapon. Sorry, I'm going slightly tired. Yeah, murder weapon and so they decide to turn off all the lights, well, not turn off all the lights, extinguish all the candles, and that they're going to kind of pass it around, and who's ever left with the dagger at the end is going to do a forfeit. And of course, as you can imagine, predictably, when all the lights go down and it comes back up, there has been a murder, although at the time they don't know that. So at the time, I mentioned Wyatt's uncle, the colonel, who's been living at the manor, is kind of taken ill, and they think it's described as like a heart seizure or something, but it's not. It is a murder, and I think it's only George and Meggie who kind of pick up on something's wrong, because Meggie holds the dagger at one point and it's sticky, and a handkerchief there's blood, and also George notices things, but nobody else really seems to. So George is kind of asked by so I didn't mention actually, so the colonel has these kind of sinister attendants to look after him. So Dr. White Whitby is the colonel's private physician, Jess Gideon, who is his lawyer, and Benjamin Dawlish is there as well, and Jessie and Benjamin are described as both foreigners and as Huns, that kind of racial slur as Germans. And this novel actually really does, you can see the influence of the First World War on Allingham's work. So in these kind of awful kind of racial depictions of Jessie and Benjamin. So Benjamin's described as grossly fat, no expression, the image of Beethoven, and he's a really sinister character in the novel. And then Jessie is kind of the opposite of him. He's very small and delicate, but also described as having a wicked face. And so I should have mentioned them earlier, because what happens is so after the colonel has died, George is asked as a medical man to come and sign the death certificate saying that, you know, no foul play, died of heart attack. George actually does manage to see the body, because they want him to sign it without him having seen it. He does see the body, realises that that's not the face of somebody that's died of a heart attack. But he wants to place cards close to his chest, George does, and he kind of does sign it anyway. But then the next morning, Dawlish announces at breakfast that something has been stolen from him. George actually found, I won't mention what it was, but he finds something and hides it. And Dawlish announces they're all going into house arrest until this thing is recovered. He has a gun, all the servants are in on it, so they are stuck in this pickle. So the 9 of these bright young things are stuck in this house, they do still get fed, you know, they are looked after in that sense, but they're very much under lock and key. They're all interrogated as well, one by one, and it really kind of brings the 9 of them not only close together, but you kind of get that sense of like the stiff upper lip of these characters who most of them just kind of make jokes and carry on and just get on with things. But what did strike me as well, I mentioned about that kind of World War One looking back to, because Meg at one point says, she goes, I thought we were beyond all of this, you know, in a modern society we thought we had rules and laws and these kind of things didn't happen. When you think about, this is where it's written 1923, I believe, let me just double check that, so it's, yes, published in 1923. The First World War has happened, the Second World War is still to come, and even today if we think about the inhumanity both in the UK and all around the world, still, you know, issues that we thought we would have dealt with, whether that's, you know, racial inequality, Black Lives Matter, gender inequality, class inequality, the way that we treat immigrants and migrants and refugees, like all this stuff, it was still that kind of line when Meggie says it, when she's feeling quite hopeless, kind of really resonated with me still today. What I also like, so with Albert Campion, we kind of get sprinkles of details of who he is. Like, we think he's aristocratic because at one point, when after they've managed to leave the house and he goes back to London, he enters like this very like distinguished club, his club in London, and a couple of instances when you know that he obviously knows this isn't his first time faced with this kind of situation, but you really don't get much of his backstory. And I can imagine, as I suppose the novels kind of go on and I read more of them, that kind of more and more details will emerge. And the book really doesn't kind of it really doesn't shy away from violence at all. in the descriptions of kind of how Campion is treated by Dawlish, how Meggie starts to be treated as well by Dawlish before George kind of intervenes. So it really does, it kind of is looking at, it doesn't shy away from violence. It's not just kind of, I think some people do describe Agatha Christie and others of this kind of era as very sort of soothing murders in a sense, or but if you actually read them, they are like very dark. I think people just have this image. I think even if you watch like the adaptations, there is still a lot of darkness in them. So when people say about, oh, you know, it's I mean, they are, some of them set in beautiful houses or in beautiful villages and, you know, on country greens and stuff, but there is always really dark elements to them. So I think people often do misjudge that. There's also a character in it who's like a drunk servant, a female middle-aged drunk servant, who I think must have been like a character type of the era, maybe coming from films or something, because she's in Ethelina White Summer's Watch as well. I mean, she's much more annoying in this book, but yeah, that's definitely in there as well. So yeah, I just wanted to end by saying it's really interesting actually when you find out in the end the reason for the murder. So I actually worked out who the murderer was really early on, which I never ever do. Considering how many crime fiction novels I've read, I don't think I ever have before. No, I think this is the first time I've actually guessed who the murderer is, which not to say that it's easy to guess, but I just had kind of an inkling. And I think you get so early on when you have those, I mentioned Dawlish and Jessie, who are very much this kind of stereotypical bad guys, and you find out that what they're involved in. You think, oh, okay, well then, so if we've already know who the murderer was and we already kind of have an idea of what's happened, then it's just about how the young people kind of get out of that situation. That's what you think. But obviously as the novel progresses, things get more complicated and you find out other motivations and what actually happened. And at the ending, so I don't want to spoil anything, but when you find out the motivation and the reason why the colonel was killed, and the broader kind of impact, so it's very much kind of a woman's issue. It does look at I don't want to kind of give too much away, but it looks at the way women are treated, let's put it like that. And it's not obviously a justification for murder, but it is really interesting to kind of look at the psychology behind why this murder takes place. Even kind of in the resolution of the novel, the way the murderer describes women, or a particular woman, is, I'm really trying so hard not to give this away, it's still very much chauvinistic, shall I say, and women and men can both be chauvinistic, so that hasn't given away the gender of the murderer. But yeah, it's still very much like you can't see beyond, or you very much see, you can't see beyond certain things, or you very much can't see this person as multidimensional. Yes, I'm going to stop there because I don't want to give stuff away. So in reviewing this book, I think it's really, really funny. It's actually one of the funniest golden era crime fiction novels I've ever read. Great dialogue. I really like Albert Campion as a detective, as quite an unusual detective, and I do wonder then if in the other novels he won't feature as the protagonist, as the main character, who's kind of there in the background to support the main characters, which would be really interesting actually, because it then means that you've got different protagonists in each novel. So this one, we got really close to George and Meggie, so if you have different protagonists in each one, I suppose it just keeps it more interesting, and then you slowly drip feed who Albert Campion is, which I think is a really interesting premise. I did actually get the next book in the series, Mystery Mile, which I'm going to read as well, and I will do a review of Ethelina White. I realised that in one of my early videos, I think for like chapter 1 and chapter 3 of reading The Lady Vanishes, that I do talk about my Ethelina White book collection, and I do give a kind of a brief synopsis of a couple of them, which ones I really love, but I really need to do a book review particularly of them. yeah, it's kind of got everything you kind of want in a crime novel. Although I do wish that Maggie had been more central to the plot. I do think George and Albert, and a lot of the male figures in the novel, tend to be the focus of action and the focus of the dialogue. And like I said, I really like Anne for representing kind of another, who's the actress, another kind of female figure, and I do like Maggie, but I think that's what I say I'd prefer about Ethelina White, is that nearly all of them, not all, but nearly all, are from that female perspective, which I just really like. But yeah, so definitely recommend Margery Allingham as a crime writer. I don't know actually if there's ever been any adaptations of her work. I will have a look up actually, see if they've ever done Albert Campion as a character, because I'd love to see how they've portrayed him. So yeah, bye guys, sorry this has been quite a long video. I took actually loads of notes, almost like I was writing like a dissertation on this novel. I was like, I need to take loads of notes so I remember things, but then you just end up talking for like so long, so I probably won't do that next time. So I'm just kind of learning about how to do these, how to do book reviews for on here. But yeah, so I hope you're all like taking care, staying safe. I'm here in my tent as always, and it's actually raining at the moment. I think you probably aren't going to be able to hear that. But yeah, stay safe, take care. Yeah, I'll be back doing some more videos about other books and reading some more chapters soon. So bye guys, take care, hope you're having a good week.